Hi, everyone. I'm Candie Fisher. I'm the founder of Candie Fisher Recruiting and Consulting. Thanks so much for joining me today for this webinar. My background, so I have 20 years of experience as a marketer and sales leader. I've hired a ton of people. About 5 years ago, I transitioned into recruiting. I thought, okay, I've hired a lot of people. I've heard that recruiting is a lot like marketing and sales, and it is, but it's much harder. The human element makes it much more complicated, of course. So now I'm running my own practice, consulting and recruiting. So I'm working with clients in consumer products, retail, hospitality, food and beverage, restaurant, a lot of fun industries. So working with a lot of high growth companies, and I've also teamed up with Luke Circle here in Boulder to provide their new talent acquisition services. So having done this now for 5 years, I don't think that marketing and recruiting are the same, but I do think there are elements that I have pulled from my marketing background that have really helped me be successful in attracting talent, particularly those passive candidates that aren't necessarily looking. So jumping into it, what do marketers do? So marketing is all about identifying the customer and knowing what motivates them. It's the process of making them aware of your company's product or service, hopefully turning them into customers, and doing that by educating and engaging them. So similarly, as recruiters, we're doing the same with target candidates. So what can we learn from marketing to really help us hire the best talent? So this is basically an agenda of what we'll be covering in this webinar. These are the steps that marketers take as they go through their ongoing marketing strategy. I'm really going to focus on the first four. I'll talk about number 5 if there's time. And again, we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to post your questions throughout. So number 1, know your audience. Why is this important? Well, I mean, realistically, you can't find what you're looking for if you don't know what that is. So you really need to understand your target in order to reach it. So what do marketers do? So there's really 3 steps in terms of identifying your audience. First, defining your customer segments. So that might be something like millennial moms. It might be if you're B2B supply chain managers. So really honing in on what that customer segment is. And then the next step is really creating a buyer persona. So really thinking about that segment. So millennial moms, for example. The millennial mom might have 2 kids. She shops online. She loves organic products. And then she secretly eats her kids' Cheez-Its after everyone goes to bed. So creating kind of a persona around your customer segment and bringing them to life. And then the third piece is really figuring out where you would find them. Again, millennial mom, she might be on mommy blogs, she might be on Pinterest, at yoga, she might be at work. There's a lot of different places that you could find this person. So as recruiters and hiring managers, what can we steal from this? Well, the first step, kind of lining up to defining your customer segment, is really defining the role. So if you have an open position, there's a lot of temptation to just kind of dig up the old job description or find a comparable job description on the internet and just post it. But you really need to think about the role. If it's an existing position, how has it changed? How have the needs of the business changed? How has the culture evolved? So really thinking through those questions either as a recruiter or pushing your hiring manager on that, making them really think about the business. The hiring manager, or if you're the hiring manager, you're distracted by a million different things. So it's very tempting to, take the path of least resistance. But in the end, it's really a waste of time to be looking for someone that doesn't actually fit the current needs of the business. And if you're the hiring manager, making sure you create that discipline to really look at the role, whether it's existing or new, and define specifically what you're looking for. The next step is identifying your ideal candidate. So again, being as specific as possible. Just like the buyer persona, the more that you know about your target, the easier it is to find them. And then the third step, kind of figuring out where to find them. Where are they working? What are they reading? What are they thinking about? Again, being very specific in creating your job description. So we'll look at a couple examples on the next slide, but basically you want to have your ideal candidate really see themselves in the role and be able to self-select. You want to also set up that candidate for success by defining what does success specifically look like in your organization. So to give you an example, a sales director might be typically judged on increasing sales. Stands to reason. But I was working on a role with Patagonia for a sales director, and success was less about the volume of sales and more about partnering with the right retailers that support Patagonia's mission, even if that meant not growing the business as quickly. So they were very specific about that, and it was a very important criterion for the role. So, it's an approach that might not be a fit for a sales leader that is primarily driven by, sales. So it made for a pretty tough search, but having that very specific view of what defines success in their organization allowed us to find the right person. Another example is collaboration. So that's very common in job descriptions. They want somebody that is very collaborative and can work with others, but there's a spectrum of collaboration. On one end, does that mean that every decision in your company is made by committee? Or on the other end, people like to brainstorm, but ultimately decisions are made by individuals. So being able to define what those competencies look like specifically for your business is very important. So 3 examples of job descriptions. These are all for an HR director role. So the first one is fairly generic. Well, the HR director will oversee HR and then list the different functions that HR is responsible for. The second one has a little bit more body to it and a little bit more specificity. The HR director will be responsible for development and delivery of talent practices. They will identify, develop, and implement talent strategies that meet the needs of the business. So a little bit more detail behind it than the first one. And then this third one really brings the job and the company to life. It has more language that conveys what's unique about the organization and what they uniquely are looking for. So a director of HR with a keen sense for gauging and growing an organization that will work entrepreneurially, that will exercise their knowledge. So a lot of active language and really, again, bringing the organization to life. So second piece, identifying the ideal candidate. So, really thinking about, number one, what are the must-haves, both functionally and from a competency standpoint. And we really have to look beyond, the 5 to 7 years of experience, they've held these specific titles, and go into, what competencies and behaviors do you want to see from this person? So not just what they've done, but really, how they have embodied that and how they have been successful. Number 2, thinking about what can be trained and learned and where are the trade-offs. I think, as we all know, we rarely find a candidate that has everything on the job description. So understanding the priorities and trade-offs up front really sets better expectations and helps us target the most important criteria. And then third, how will you know when you find them? So if you are an HR and, are a recruiter working with a hiring manager, you hear a lot of, I'll know it when I see it. That's not really a good answer. You really have to push to understand the behaviors that define success in the role in order to be successful. I think, have a common language to assess when you will know them when you find them is critically important. And then thirdly, figuring out where to find them. Again, thinking about your own industry. Where are these people? Are they at association meetings and trade shows? Are they online and social media? Is it the type of role where you reach out on LinkedIn? Or are you posting on Craigslist? Are they reading Luke's Circle? Thinking about a strategy of how to reach your candidate beyond just posting on your site, and thinking about how you target them given what the ideal candidate profile looks like. So the next thing we can steal from marketers is how to differentiate your offering. And so when we talk about differentiation, we're talking about how to stand out in the marketplace. So what do marketers do? So marketers take their target audience and then they find unique things in their brand that appeals to that audience. So Starbucks up here, for example, they don't just say, we sell coffee. People can make coffee at home, obviously, for a lot less than they pay at Starbucks. So Starbucks has made themselves that third place you go rather than home or work. They've created brand stories and experiences that really connect with their target consumers. Segmenting the messaging depending on the buyer persona, whether it's, a mom or it's a college student. They have different messaging and really differentiate themselves in that way. So what can we steal? So doing the same really by connecting to the target audience we've defined in step 1. So leveraging the unique things about working for our company. And again, it's really about being unique, not generic. Saying you have a great culture is generic. Frankly, saying that you have free lunch and foosball can also be generic if everybody in your space is doing the same. So really digging deep on what's truly unique and appealing to people that you want to work at your company. So I have a couple of examples. This is from a career page on a website for Hormel, and no offense to Hormel, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's pretty generic. They talk about commitment to consumers, employees and communities. They talk about employees being the greatest asset, fostering success. Again, nothing bad in there. That's all great stuff, but it doesn't really say what it truly is like to work for Hormel. This next one is an excerpt from a career page from an engineering company. And they talk about things like creativity is intelligence having fun, or solving challenging problems is in their lifeblood. So you get a really good feel for what it's like to work with them and the type of person that they're looking for. So again, kind of using very active, very vibrant language to communicate who they are and what they need, the type of person that is in their ideal candidate profile. So in terms of looking at the components of an employer brand, I encourage you to really think about a couple of things. I think that mission, values, and vision are great. They are kind of just a start. So really, how do those come to life in your organization? You need to connect the dots for people that don't experience it every day. Ideally, you would want to work with your marketing department, or at least make sure you're consistent with overall brand and positioning. But there's a lot you can kind of extract from your company brand and put that in your employer brand, and vice versa. It's really great to make sure you're coordinating with marketing in getting that message out, which kind of brings us to our next step, which is tell your story. And so I don't know if you're noticing a pattern, but another thing that marketers do is repeat things over and over again. It might seem redundant, but you're competing with, a million messages a day. So you can't really assume your one message got through. So that's why it's important to tell your story. And how do they do that? So marketers develop a content marketing strategy and they engage customers across channels with consistent messaging. So you've defined your target audience, you've created your unique messages and your differentiation, and so now you have to get those messages out there. It needs to be consistent, sustained, and frequent. You can't break through with, a couple of Facebook posts here or there, just throwing up a video on your website. It's really about putting together an ongoing strategy to connect with your audience and stay top of mind. So what can we steal? Really just doing the same thing, but keeping in mind our ideal candidate profiles. So engaging candidates across all channels with consistent messaging. And so content marketing can be pretty intimidating. So this is, I think, even an outdated slide of just some of the platforms and tools out there. So there's a million ways that you can develop and distribute your content. I would say, again, partnering with your marketing team is your best bet. and adding your employer brand, your job posting content to their existing calendar. But if you can't do that, truly, content marketing is actually really simple. It's taking content and channels and combining them with each other. So examples of content would be video, articles, posts, announcements, webinars. Examples of channels would be websites, emails, Instagram, YouTube. So all the various combinations of taking the messages and putting them out on different channels. So a couple examples of that. Some really great employer brand marketing. I like this one. This is a Marriott Instagram, specifically their career site. So you could have a career Instagram, or you could just do this on your regular Instagram page. But I think it's cool because it's a big brand. They're highlighting folks that work in their various properties. And it's something that small brands could easily do. It's low cost, and people really love to see, you know, who your employees are and what they love about what they do. This is a LinkedIn page, so that Box did specifically to highlight sales opportunities. I think it's a great option. It can get expensive, so for smaller companies that might be a little bit limiting, but LinkedIn's always adding new features to highlight your company and your employer brand. And it can really be a nice way to build a talent pipeline or a community for roles where you're experiencing a high need. And then this is a video, which actually I'm not sure if it will work.
How's it going, John? Oh, I see. Have a drink of your Gatorade? That's not Gatorade, Steve. Dude.
And that's just an example of video content that I developed at Eldorado Climbing Walls. It was super low cost. People really loved it, and it had a dual purpose of showing off the company brand as well as the employer brand. So the last topic for DIY recruiting is really around working your funnel. And so this is all about the journey, both for candidates and for your internal stakeholders that are trying to find the right person for the role. So again, what do marketers do? They map the customer journey, and then at each different stage, they're creating differentiated touch points. And we'll talk about what that journey looks like. And then what we can steal, again, it's just flipping it into the candidate journey and making sure we're creating differentiated touch points at each stage that both help the candidate understand the role and help us kind of filter down to the ideal candidate profile. So this is kind of an old school marketing funnel. There are a million different versions of a marketing funnel, but this is kind of the simplest. And I think it aligns really well to the candidate funnel. So in terms of walking through each stage, starting with awareness. So awareness is kind of top of the funnel, a lot of the storytelling, a lot of the mass communication, social media, outreach, even to passive candidates. This is your job posting, but also going beyond that, as we discussed in terms of telling your story. And so from a candidate standpoint, it's making the target audience aware of your company and role. And then we move to the consideration stage. So this is where the candidate is considering the role. They're thinking about you as an option. They're looking for more detailed information. Possibly you're moving to more one-on-one communication with the candidate. So making sure that you've really thought about those specific competencies and behaviors, and that they're being clearly described either in conversation or in the content that you're putting out there. Again, you really want people to be able to self-select and see themselves in the role or in your organization. Realistically, of course, you'll still have those people that apply to everything, regardless of their fit, but you're really trying to reach that ideal candidate and make sure that they see themselves in this role. And then we move down to preference. So at this stage, both you and the candidate have narrowed down the options, and we're going through the process. We're heading toward a decision. So really thinking about, what does your hiring process look like? From your standpoint, what information are you extracting and assessing about the candidate? But also, what are you sharing and making sure that they know and what they're learning about the role and company to make sure that there's that mutual fit? A lot of times the interview process tends to be one-sided, having the candidate kind of prove that they're right for the role. But ultimately, for them to be successful, they need to have a transparent view into the organization and also have the opportunity to make sure that the role is right for them. And then I compare the purchase stage in the marketing funnel with a candidate accepting an offer. So the decision's made, everybody's excited, everybody high fives, the role's filled. But you really need to also think about the experience of those that aren't selected and how you maintain those relationships for the future. Just because they're, the second and runner-up or the third doesn't mean they might not be a good fit for you down the road. And so really, thinking about how you have closure to the process that best represents the brand. So thinking about, again, what is your process for notifying candidates and applicants that they're not selected so that they have a positive experience and potentially, can be in your pipeline for future roles. So I'm working with a company in Boulder right now on a few projects, and they have the best rejection letter. It's super quirky, it's very funny, and it really represents their brand. And in it, they try and convert applicants into customers by offering sample products and creating a relationship, even though the person wasn't selected for an interview. And the feedback from applicants has been very, very positive. They're disappointed, obviously, not to be selected, but A, they're happy to hear back, and B, they really enjoy that their rejection also represents the brand that they weren't interested in. And then the last stage in the marketing funnel is loyalty. And I liken that to where the ideal candidate gets successfully onboarded, they become engaged employee, and that's a webinar for another day. But that's kind of walking through the process and really, again, thinking about your journey and mapping that out. So if you haven't taken the time to really put that down to paper and kind of think about those touch points, I would encourage you to do so. So we focused on kind of DIY recruiting and hit the first 4 topics. So the strategies I've shared, they're all ones that you can implement on your own. They take some time and resources, but regardless of the size of company, it's something that can be useful for your organization. At the same time, especially if you're a smaller company, other priorities get in the way. And so that kind of takes us to number 5, which is bring in experts. And so why is that important? I think that, everybody, what's also similar to me about marketing recruiting, everybody thinks they're an expert in marketing and everyone seems to think they're a natural recruiter as well. So sometimes you need to really think about bringing in external expertise. Marketers don't try to do everything themselves. They bring in experts, whether it be SEO, social media, branding. I mean, there's a specialist for every single marketing function. And so from a hiring standpoint, it really does make sense to think about when do you bring in outside resources. It could be to, fill a tough role. It could be, someone to help you map the candidate journey, create your employer brand, or extra sourcing bandwidth if you're growing really quickly. So with this topic, I just want to touch on a couple things in terms of identifying the right partner. Obviously, it's important to know what you need. Are you trying to hire a bunch of people quickly? Are you looking to fill one, very critical high-end executive role? It might be different resources that you would bring in based on the need. There are a ton of different models there's contingent search, retain, there's hourly resources, they're project-based. There's pros and cons to all based on what you need, and I'm not going to get into them here, but just in terms of things to consider, I think, when you're evaluating a partner, thinking about what tools they have access to, their experience in your industry and with the type of roles, that also kind of informs who they might have in their network. And then the agency size, is it a one-person shop like me? Is it a larger agency? And again, that depends on what your needs are and what specifically you're trying to achieve by partnering with somebody. Having been on kind of both sides of the equation, actually all three sides, a candidate, a recruiter, and a hiring manager, I mean, I think the right partnership at the end of the day is really just, that's the piece that makes all the difference. Communication ultimately is the key to having a good experience and a good outcome. And so no matter the tools or experience or network of the service provider, it really does come down to them and you being transparent, them having a point of view, and trying to truly make an effort to understand your business. So that's kind of it. Of course, if you are interested in learning more about my services, you can reach me by the phone number or email on the slide. Feel free to send me a chat with your contact details. And then if anyone has questions, feel free to send them through now on the chat and I can address them. But with that, I wanted to thank you again for attending today's webinar. I hope that you took some new ideas away for enhancing your hiring process. And I just wanted to thank you for coming.